Hey everybody, welcome back to Space Problems. My name is Chris, and today I'm joined by Ben and Derek.
And are you like flicking a switch of some kind?
Yeah, I'm nervous. I'm gonna put my pen away. All right, I'm gonna do that again. Throw the pen out the window.
Oh, we're keeping this.
Oh, I see you are. All
Welcome.
right. Welcome everybody. Welcome back to Space Problems, where we have all kinds of problems, not just in space. Today we're gonna be tackling two old school, or for probably most of the viewers or listeners to our podcast, it'd be old school for them, but movies that were underappreciated and underrated at the time. And but before we get into that, I'd like to touch on a couple interesting bits of news and everything in each one of our wheelhouses, dealing with Predator, Star Trek, and Star Wars. Ben, I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can update us on some of the news that just dropped with the new Predator movie. Now that we're about a month away from release.
Well, uh, since the last episode? I think since the last episode was it at the day after we recorded it, the next trailer dropped.
Oh,
So
the second trailer, right? Yeah.
mostly everything that we talked about was just answered the next day, and so it just sounds like we were way behind on everything.
Yeah, I mean, since we recorded, we've had Comic-Con pass and everything. There's been news, but I think the biggest news actually just happened within the last week, and I think I told you guys about, was that one of the main marquee actors that I was looking forward to seeing in a movie or on the big screen again, Edward James Olmos, news came out that all of his scenes have been cut.
Yeah, due to time constraints, is from what I've heard, and I know this the movie's been reshot twice, or it had two reshoots, so two sets of reshoots or whatever. And the first one, the first reshoots I know were Shane Black inspired because he wanted the ending or the third act to be shot at night and before it was shot during the day, and he said it just didn't look right. Everybody knows what the Predator looks like. He wanted to be shot at night, so it's a little more scary.
Bringing back the horror of it.
Yeah, and how lethal the Predator is, and but the second round of reshoots I heard were studio driven, and they wanted to be set up for a sequel, which I'm really skeptical and just kind of pissed about.
Yeah, at this point, with the news that I've just heard in the past couple of days, I got to be skeptical too.
Although I do agree with the first set of reshoots. I like that idea because I don't know. I think something about fighting the predators in broad daylight.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talked about in the last podcast. The Predator 2 tackled a lot of daylight issues. I mean, it was more for the actors. There wasn't a whole lot of Predator fighting for the drug cartel. And then I guess in Predators, there was a lot of daylight shooting, but it's one of those, if you're going to fight in daylight against the Predator, he's almost always going to be cloaked.
Well, the issue that I have with Predators is that they try to exactly copy the first movie in almost every way. They still had the same soundtrack. It was in the jungle, but you had a problem with Adrian Brody being generic action man, and you still had
which just does not work for Adrian Brody. I'm sorry, it just doesn't.
No, it's way out of character. But going back to a little bit of like what you brought up, Ben, with the possible sequel. Now, I think that Predator is one of the properties that Disney now owns, and Disney's come out and said that a lot of the properties that they just acquired from Fox doesn't fit in with their quote-unquote family-driven model, for lack of a
Predator is now a Disney princess.
But female Predators could be, But yeah, it leaves me open to speculation that potentially word came down for the second set of reshoots, or even potentially a third set that we haven't heard about.
Imagine they're like the Disney Aladdin version of A Whole New World. It's like a whole new world to conquer and rip out fucking skulls.
Yeah, I'm thinking that maybe Shane Black's original vision and everything had it left open for a sequel, and the word came down. It's like, look, we don't want to leave this open-ended. I'm thinking that.
I think most likely what's going to happen is Disney's going to just kind of do a quick audit of essentially everything that they acquired, and they're more likely to just sell off specific properties. It's happened several times during mergers like this, because the thing is, it's not like the properties aren't worth money. Disney's not
No.
just going to sit on something that could make them money just because they're like, well, this doesn't really fit in our brand. The best way to make money off it at that point is just to sell it to somebody who is going to use it. Because then,
maybe it'll go back to 20th Century Fox, or maybe a company like Lionsgate will step in and be like, hey, we kind of like.
Well, 20th Century Fox is officially over.
So maybe somebody like Lionsgate, which has a history with a little bit more darker and grittier movies, not afraid to get their hands muddy or
well, yeah,
whatever.
like Dread.
Maybe they'll pick it. Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot of what we talked about in the last podcast. Derek, I know that there's a lot of news with Star Trek coming out one specific thing that everybody's
so much
jonesing over. Why don't you go ahead and dish away, dump on it? Just give us a whole bunch of stuff that's coming out. I just read something today that if you don't bring up, I'm going to kind of interject in here. So have at it, man. Trek is your universe. Go for it.
All right. Hold my tea, Earl Grey hot. Because the return of Captain Jean-Luc Picard is definitely happening. That's been confirmed. I mean, this is going to be news to no one who listens to this. Because anybody that listens to this is, has access to the internet. So probably know by now. But it's still a huge deal for a lot of reasons. But I'm going to kind of back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the whole situation very briefly, just to give it some context. Because before people get really excited about the return of Patrick Stewart, I do want to kind of temper that expectation with a few facts. So essentially, without getting into the crazy minutia of licensing issues and all sorts of madness that are around what it takes to make a current Star Trek show, especially because of the weird, like I said, again, the licensing issue between CBS and Paramount. The short version is they made Star Trek Discovery. It did not go over well.
Right.
And even though you've got a lot of people at CBS hailing it as a huge win, the media said it was a win, the reviews were positive, the truth is the numbers weren't very good. And pretty much everybody who's looked into it has essentially discovered there's, it's not like it was a flop, but it definitely wasn't the success they were looking for.
It wasn't gangbusters. It wasn't.
Right. There was a lot of. Yeah, and there's a lot of moves that have happened to address this. So according to sources, they significantly retooled the second half of the season to help accommodate some of the criticisms, that sort of thing, as well as just generally trying to save face. Like they really stepped back from their very harsh response to the fans, which I think was very ill-conceived. And and when they came out, swinging in this Comic-Con, it was very clear that the trailer they showed for season 2, where they're showing Christopher Pike and him sporting something that looks a lot closer to like the original uniform, for instance, it's very much a clear attempt to try to woo some of these old fans back. But rumor has it that this is on very, very shaky ground for several reasons, not just because it underperformed, but also because the first season was essentially paid for by Netflix. Because Netflix paid them a huge amount of money for the exclusive rights to air the show outside of the United States.
Oh, okay. And I didn't know that. So for viewers over like in Europe and Asia that don't necessarily have access to CBS.
Right. So CBS All Access is still a U.S. exclusive platform. So internationally, everybody else who watched it on Netflix. Thing is that Netflix realized how much money there was to be made in Star Trek because they have the numbers. Star Trek is just, binged constantly by fans. So they thought that they were getting access to a pretty hot property. So they paid premium dollar for it. Right. They paid so much that it essentially paid for the production of season 1. So CBS, more or less, didn't have to spend a single dime on the production of season 1 of Star Trek Discovery. Netflix fits the whole bill. And the rumor is that once Netflix saw what Discovery was and what they were getting, they were very unhappy with it. and essentially they were furious and demanded all kinds of changes, that sort of thing. A lot of that's up for speculation, but the fact that they're mad about it and everything else, no one's really debating that. This time around, Netflix did not pay them and is basically really fought them on the rights and how much money they would spend on it and everything else. So Discovery season 2 the bill is being filled entirely by CBS.
Oh,
and so they dramatically lowered
really on the hook for
everything. And they dramatically lowered the budget for it. And the sources that have leaked really suggest that basically they're already thinking that this might not last past season 2. So they have now fast-tracked and greenlit a new Star Trek that can solve all these problems. And they've put Alex Kurtzman in charge to essentially be the Kevin Feige of a new Star Trek franchise universe thing. And he's going to supposedly rebrand the whole Star Trek. The rumor is that they're going to do something with this new show that's essentially going to merge the Kelvin and Prime timelines, wipe their history out, and make a new timeline from scratch. And all of the new properties moving forward will be in the new timeline. And that's where the new Captain Picard show comes into play. Even in the press release, they straight up said he will definitely not be a captain anymore.
Probably like an admiral or something like that. Like he's moved up.
Well,
they
tried really hard to temper expectations, and I heavily get the vibe that they're kind of implying that he's essentially sort of like not even in Starfleet and kind of disgruntled, and that this might be more of like a comeback story or something. I don't know. But the implication is that this might not even take place in the Prime timeline either. So while I'm really excited about Jean-Luc being back, I'm nervous. I'm nervous because of how they might go about doing it. I really, really don't want them to essentially wipe out all the history and everything. JJ was trying to do that even with the original reboot, and no one liked the idea for good reason. So,
I think that idea has grown on people a little bit. I think that over time, I think that idea has gained a little bit more footing, having a Prime timeline and a Kelvin timeline. But I'm not sure. I think that's why a lot of people are hesitant about what you're just saying about this new timeline that maybe just really undoes everything in the Prime and Kelvin timelines and sets a new timeline. I mean, granted, it's in the future, so the timelines could essentially merge again somewhere. But I can see why you're skeptical about a lot of stuff, and I can also see why you're cautious about a lot of stuff. Understandably so.
Well, and I'm not like one of these other Star Trek fans that, kind of just decided to hate on Discovery forever. I mean, to me, it was a train wreck, but far more because it was just poorly done and just didn't really get its footing because it couldn't really commit to what it was. I was willing to like Discovery, but to me, it's not really well done as far as they kept saying it was going to be in the Prime timeline. It's clearly not in the Prime timeline. They kept saying like that they cared about continuity. You watch the show and they clearly don't care about continuity. I mean, there's like a million things that if they'd have just straight up come out and said, we're taking Star Trek in a new direction, deal. I think it actually would have gone over better than what they ended up doing.
So basically the future of Star Trek is really up in the air as far as what we're going to get out of it, whether it's good, bad, or
I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous simply because Alex Kurtzman does not have a great track record.
What's his background? I know
so
the name,
he's done a lot of screenwriting for Hollywood, but not good stuff. He's been heavily involved in things like the Transformers movies with Michael Bay. He co-wrote the reboot Star Trek, the 2009 one.
That's where I know it from. Okay.
But the other writer was actually the Star Trek fan. And there's a lot of stories about that I'm not really going to get into. But most recently, he wrote and directed the Mummy movie with Tom Cruise.
Silence.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
I actually just watched something on that, but yeah, I can see why. Now, yeah, like I said, I think I see why you're a little more than hesitant on
All
some of this
hail
stuff.
season 2 of the Orville.
Yes, season 2 of the
Yes,
Orville.
the
Thank
Orville
God.
looks fantastic.
You guys watch the season 2 trailer?
Yeah, but that's not
I
what this
I
episode's
I,
about.
Yeah, I
I
know. We'll
started to
get there.
watch it and I actually turned it off because I was like, no, I don't want to spoil any of
Okay.
the season.
Well,
I'm
I
too
know what I'll
excited
be doing
to watch
December
it.
31st or shortly after. So just for that. Moving on, because we got to try to keep this a little bit going. But I just want to interject my news about the Star Wars stuff. I'm sure that a lot of people have seen, but filming has started. It started about 2 weeks ago. And with the news that, of all people, Carrie Fisher will be back for episode 9 of Star Wars, what they're calling the final chapter of the Skywalker story.
I figured
Now
they
they
saved footage.
It's okay, so here's the deal. J.J. Abrams and Billy Lord sat down and they talked, and they are going to use unused footage that they shot for episode 7, which J.J. was a part of and everything. There was apparently enough unused footage from episode 7 of Carrie Fisher doing whatever in whatever capacity that they're able to use that in conjunction with a going forward story to film at least enough of her scenes to give her some kind of conclusion within a story. And I'm guessing, based on what that says or not, that is that somewhere in the first act or the first half of the first act, we probably will lose Princess Leia / General Leia in that part. It was something that J.J. Abrams and Billy Lord, who is Carrie Fisher's daughter, sat down, talked about, and came to this conclusion that they can shoot enough with what's already been shot and shoot around it to do that without any use of CGI, any kind of computer generated stuff for Princess Leia going forward. So that's a little bit of news.
Yeah, and
It's
I get it from a respectful standpoint where that's good, but I'm worried that the story is going to be hampered on that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to prejudge. I guess
that's why I'm hoping that maybe it'll just be within the first part of the first act. Kind of get it over and done with, move the story along. I know that it seems kind of callous to say that. And even as a huge Star Wars fan, I don't like saying that, but I think to do it the best way possible, it needs to be done quickly at the beginning. But like I said, they've also announced that this is the final chapter of the Skywalker story. That being said as well, Mark Hamill is back. I'm guessing that he's going to be back in Force Ghost form, a la Obi-Wan and Yoda, probably moving Rey along in her teachings of that. And the biggest news that I'm excited about is that Billy D. Williams, Lando Calrissian himself, is back in episode 9. This was a rumor that started months ago with people seeing him going to the gym and working out, which was, since he wasn't really working on a lot of stuff, it was news that was being like, hey, we spotted Billy D's working out a little bit more. It seems like he's getting himself back into a little bit more shape. And then I think it was over Comic-Con, bam, it was announced. They announced the full cast shortly after, and Billy D was listed in there, as well as another old veteran of older like 90s movies and some other stuff since then. Around that, Kerry Russell, who was a big Disney actress back in the 90s, and since then with a few other projects I know her work on. I think it's The American has really kept her on TV, but she is also confirmed for it. So all your main cast is back: Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Billy D, Carrie Williams, amongst the rest of the main cast.
Well, that concludes our intro for the episode.
Yeah, that was a little bit longer intro, but I think that
Derek's asleep now.
yeah.
No, I was just not wanting to chime in because I knew we were trying to keep this short. I didn't want to make it much
That's all
longer.
But now
I
that
just
we've kind of
but the only thing I'll say before we move on is
go for it.
I am actually looking forward to Star Trek, or I mean, sorry, Star Wars 9, mostly because I just need to see how they get themselves out of this particular pickle. I just have to know how JJ writes themselves out of the corner that Rain Johnson put him in.
Yeah.
And that's not even necessarily like, I'm not saying like The Last Jedi is the worst thing ever or anything like that. I'm just saying that from a storytelling perspective,
It was the worst idea ever.
that's a terrible spot to leave you in eight, because there's not a lot you can do going forward from there. So I'm very interested in seeing where it moves forward.
Yeah, I am too. And like I said, I think that the best thing that they did was announce that this is the final chapter of the Skywalker story. So where they go from here with all the movies that they've potentially announced, it's a clean. It's essentially now you can have a completely clean slate, and you don't have to worry about what we're talking about, like with Star Trek, with a continuity.
Well,
problem.
this, as we've discussed in previous episodes, this is one of my issues with the Star Wars franchise, is how limited in scope it is, and it's because they focused on the freaking like the Skywalker family. There's not many places you can go.
Right, and that is a, like you said, cinematic universe problem. I mean,
But I think I would just counterpoint that real quick by saying, but with George Lucas's original plan, that's all there really needed to be. I mean, like, he basically never intended for it to be any more than 6 or 9.
And I agree with that. I agree with that.
And he planned it around a generational thing. So, it's not like, I guess all I'm getting at is it was intentionally limited. And I don't think it's a problem if Disney had made the choice to essentially just let 1 through 6 be the Skywalker saga, and then started fresh, like, I don't know, with a story. I think it would have been far better if they'd have started off with a story that took place like minimum 100 years later, or something like that.
Like, I'm glad it's back in JJ's hands, but I don't know what he can do from here. We can see if he can make some lemonade,
Yeah, we'll see what comes around, but definitely, I'm hoping that I guess maybe the best thing you could do would be wrap it up with some nostalgia from what we had before, and kind of maybe get the bitter taste out of our mouths. On the topic of nostalgia, try to move this back to where we're going for this episode, is something that you guys did a few episodes back, episode 3 or 4 for you guys before I came in. You guys did a overrated and underappreciated episode, and I thought that we discussed several ways that we could bring that back to light and maybe make it a regular thing. I think that we found it was a lot easier, especially with our genre, to talk about sci-fi movies that were wonderfully underappreciated films, especially in their times, but movies that need to be watched by any sci-fi fan.
Anymore, it's hard to say something that's overappreciated, because I feel like any film now that comes out, there's a million haters behind it. Right. And so it's hard for me to say that anything is, I guess, quote unquote, overappreciated nowadays, especially in sci-fi. I can't think of anything. Can you?
Which is really a shame, because I think there's still a vast majority of the population that still loves these things and wants to talk about how great they are. But unfortunately, we're kind of in a weird era where
it's easier to rip on and hate than it is to raise something.
Right, because unfortunately that gets the clicks. The negativity sells better than the positivity. I mean, it's just unfortunately the way it is.
Yeah. So what's our first movie we're talking about here?
Well, we're going to talk about 2 movies. I'm going to name them both, and then I think we're going to go in chronological order by date that they were released. So the 2 movies that we're going to be talking about today: 1984's The Last Starfighter, and 2000, the release of Titan AE. Derek, I'm going to pass this one to you first, and we can start talking about Last Starfighter. So,
diarrhea.
Oh man, yes.
Yeah, just remember that one makeout scene of the little brother. Just his reaction to them making out is diarrhea.
Classic.
80s families, gotta love it.
Gotta love it.
So, I just want to start off by saying this is a flawed movie. It's not perfect. I would not give this a 5 out of 5. I love this movie. I really do. It's genuinely one of my favorite movies, but I love it more because of the potential it had and a lot of the ideas it has. And there's still great things about the movie, but just it has its problems too.
Well, let's get that out of the way. What are the problems first, just so we can end it on a positive note? Like, what are your problems?
Yeah, I
You wanna
mean,
bring the negatives up first.
overwhelmingly, I want to talk about the positives because I think there's far more of that than negatives. But
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with this movie, and I think we'll say the same about the next one, is it was ahead of its time and it was too ambitious for its time. And I think it tries very nobly to be, this very giant and sweeping space epic, and it just can't quite make it. It just can't quite make it. I think a large part of that is simply because the limitations that they had with their time, their budget. They decided to rely heavily on CGI long before CGI was tried and true. It was a very risky move, but
Yeah.
I respect them for actually trying it, especially because while the CGI does look horribly dated by today's standards, it still looked way better than pretty much anything that was available at the time. There's things that there's bad CGI that looks not as good as this, going all the way into like the early 2000s. For
True,
instance,
and
you know what I mean? Like it was high quality CGI for the time. It just it just wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't ready.
Yeah, and then, like I said, I think the biggest thing, besides what you mentioned, is that its movie was very ambitious for 1994. It just the
Right.
technology, especially on a low budget film, wasn't up to the point where they could combine the two or do something with CGI.
No, and you're right. Aside from that, and a few other minor story complaints that I had with it, it was like, oh, this sophisticated alien species had for some reason had a shipping issue, and instead of shipping the arcade to Las Vegas, it got shipped to this no-name trailer park.
I can address that one though, but I was gonna point out that I think the only other major issue I have is simply that I think the human storyline elements is probably the weakest part of it. I think the stuff they do in space is great. The stuff they do with the main character when he's in space is great, but I felt that the human storyline that took place while he was in space was probably the weakest part of the movie.
And I'll tell you why.
Except for when Beta sacrifices himself to protect her. I just think it was a wasted opportunity to move both parts of the story forward. Like it would have been better if there was something going on Earth that was somehow going to eventually help aid him in his battle in space or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
Because the problem I have with it is while the storyline in the trailer park explains why no one misses it, it's like the entire Earth storyline is essentially there to fill a plot hole. It's there to explain why no one misses him, what happens when he's gone, how people are getting along without him, but it's not helping the storyline.
Yeah, it doesn't develop any part of the storyline. The big issue why, and I think I can probably answer one of the reasons why you have such a problem with this, as do probably most of us, is that basically all the scenes with Beta and having him there as for those that haven't seen the movie, Beta is the android, for lack of a better term, and everything,
replacement, yeah,
replacement for our main character, or Alex. Thank you. While he's off in space trying to be a starfighter, is that was all shot after the movie was completely finished. They viewed it, they tested it, they said that it was, for whatever reason, they didn't have enough Earth presence or Earth storyline, everything, and they shot all of those scenes with Beta after the movie was pretty much already done, trying to, like you said, fill plot holes as they could. And and one of the reasons that you can tell this is that Beta, his hair looks really different because it was a wig. It's one of those ways that you can tell that that it was shot afterwards, and that was just something they determined after filming the entire movie, is that for whatever reason they decided to try to fill those plot holes on Earth. It becomes a jumble, but it still moves.
Right.
It still moves the stuff along, and I think it actually helps with a lot more humor. It interjects a lot more humor into it. Beta has a hard time.
I think that was the goal. Is they were trying to use it for comedy relief, but and kind of justify it that way, as well as addressing plot holes. But I think the big issue here is I think they were trying to do something in the vein of Star Wars, where it doesn't really matter what happens back on the home planet, because Luke is free to leave and never look back because his aunt and uncle are dead.
Right.
Which I know sounds very harsh, but from a storytelling point of view, you have to address, like, are they okay with leaving and never coming back? And part of the problem that The Last Starfighter runs into is you get to know these characters, and there's a lot of them. It's not just Alex's immediate family.
Yeah,
He's
it's not
kind of
Alex.
part of a whole mini family that's part of the trailer park, and they even heavily rely on him. He helps them fix their stuff. So
Right.
he's taking care of these people. So you have a problem, and you can't have Alex just suddenly leave and never feel bad about it.
Right, you have to give him a chance to leave, and then like he decides to come back and everything when he's like, no, this isn't what I signed up for. It was a video game, and you're talking about
Right.
real war and the possibility of people dying, and that's not what I signed up for. I was just playing a video game and trying to beat a hard
Right.
score, and everything.
And that moment is one of the best of the movie, and I'm going to save that for when I talk about the better parts. But what I'm getting at is, from a thematic standpoint, if you're telling you want to tell a good story, you've introduced him as being part of this family, but then for the rest of the movie, you show him basically having no regard for them and not really think twice about them, except for his girlfriend.
Right.
And then he shows up at the end of the movie and just picks up his girlfriend, and he's like, all right, later, peace.
Yeah. Bye.
So
you gotta go now. Yeah.
That's one of the problems I have with the storytelling, is that they introduced a really good plot line, as far as I liked the idea that, and this was what I was hoping would happen while Beta was there. I liked the idea that they showed all this people were dependent on him, but were kind of using him.
Right. They were overly dependent upon him.
Yeah, and they were like kind of entitled by it, because a lot of them gave him crap when it was like he's running around trying to do everything for everybody. And they were like, no, I deserve this. He needs to fix my antenna because he's the one that does that stuff, even though I'm not paying him and doesn't work for me or anything. I was hoping that what would happen was that Beta was essentially going to actually like kind of sort that out and be like, no, Alex doesn't owe you anything. Fix your own damn TV or something. So by the time the real Alex comes back, those townspeople will have actually transformed and be like, hey, we were holding him back, and here's this whole universe that he needs to go help, and everything will be
basically
fine
they're
on
the
their
ones
own.
that are now that he sees that they're not relying on him, he can change his mind and be like, okay, maybe they don't need me here. I'll
right
go back
now I'm free to go do my thing.
Now I'm free to fulfill my destiny and become a Starfighter.
Yeah, that would have made a much better movie.
Yeah.
This is I've mentioned on the podcast before that I'm a filmmaker, and this is the only movie I am willing to remake. I mean, there's probably a few more if I really wanted to dig on it, but the only movie that I've ever actively thought about remaking and would very much go out of my way to remake.
You would like a shot at remaking this movie. It falls in the category of this one deserves a remake.
Yes. And I think this one more than any, because it is the perfect situation, because the movies you need to remake are the ones that have a really good idea and really good potential, and just for whatever reason didn't quite make it. And with the case of The Last Starfighter, I feel like it was simply, they really ran into problems as far as just stuff that was limited by their time. The CGI wasn't ready. They weren't really able to produce the movie on the budget they wanted. I mean, I feel so bad for them, because the passion is so relevant. You can see it all over the film, that they were passionate about it and they wanted it, and they just couldn't quite make it. So for me, remaking The Last Starfighter.
Nice.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But for me, remaking The Last Starfighter.
Remember that, Disney.
Is
Derek
almost a
wants to remake The Last Jedi.
I do not. I really don't.
Could make it 6 hours long. Sorry, go ahead. But I'm done.
Retcon everything.
There you go.
No, but I would love to do the remake of The Last Starfighter as a loving homage to what they wanted. Like it's
Yeah.
like I don't want to take it and just be like, oh, we're gonna start from scratch and throw everything out the window. Like I really
You're
want to
talking
kind of
about
keep it.
you're talking almost a page by page remake, just with today's
No,
technology and budget.
not quite. I really want to fix all the story elements and
Okay.
refine it, but the core of everything I want to keep the same. I want to keep the spirit of it the same. I want to keep like specific details the same, but
Yeah.
I think the story needs work. Like there's a lot of work that needs to be done with the human characters and even some of the space stuff.
Yeah.
And the
The-
grand scheme of things needs to be flushed out a little bit because I do feel that the scale of the conflict, especially in the third act,
Is
is
not that
it
big.
is well, it's they keep claiming it's big, but it doesn't feel big.
It doesn't come off that
And
way. Yeah.
and I think part of the problem is that they just don't have enough time to get you there because they got to spend the first third of the movie getting him into space, and then they got to spend another like so much of the movie getting you used to space. And by the time the third act shows up, you're supposed to be like, oh my god, this is this huge epic thing, but you've had very very little time to introduce any of that to people. So
Yeah.
I think this would almost be better set up for like a trilogy or something like that. But I think the first film should be its own thing. Just I think instead of the final battle being the definitive battle with Zor, it could be just,
A major
like
defeat with a
simply
retreat on the bad guy's side. The Kodan
well, I was
Armada
kind
is
of
defeated, but at what cost?
I don't really want to get into specifics simply because if I ever do get a shot at this, I don't want to give away the
No,
the
fair enough.
plot
No,
of
I
this.
mean, and
But I think I just wanted to make it clear that the point is that they need to win a definitive victory that essentially announces that the Starfighters are back
okay.
and that sort of thing. Because I think that the myth, the mythic quality of the Starfighters is something that could be explored a lot more because they only briefly touch on it. But the whole point, one of the things that drew me so much to this movie, and I'm going to start getting into the positives because there's just so many, because I love the potential and so many of the ideas. But I love the fact that a starfighter was something you had to earn. Like regular people just couldn't be starfighters. Like I kind of, it's sort of the opposite of where they're going with Star Wars that I'm not really crazy about because in this new direction they're going, they're kind of trying to make it like anyone can have the Force, anyone can be a Jedi, anyone can do anything. And okay, I kind of see where you're going with that, but I like the idea that you have to earn it. It's not about someone being better than someone else. It's about earning something, working and fighting hard to get that skill. It's celebrating that effort that went in to getting that good.
Right, and that's actually something. Actually, it's a small plot point that they actually do bring up in the movie is when they're given Centauri, when he gets back with Alex and everything, they're giving him a hard time about how they are finding the starfighters. It's like, what'd you do, the Excalibur test again? It's like, and he goes, no, it wasn't some sword in a stone kind of thing around that. With this planet, we did a video game. It seems like these tests are put out there in the universe to whoever is destined or qualified or, for lack of a better word, the chosen one to pass
worthy
them to become worthy. Yes, worthy to
yeah.
pass these tests to become a starfighter. And like you said, with Earth, we chose a video game, and and we see that
and shipped
this
it
is
to the
something
wrong
that,
place.
yeah, and it's something that this kid, because if it had showed up at Vegas like it was supposed to, thousands of people would have just played it and played it and played it, and they would have gotten beat and they would have moved on. But since it got dropped in this trailer park where nothing else happened, this kid has probably played that game just about every day for
it's been like a
hours on
simulator
end for his entire life.
And it's his only escape. This is something that I love the idea that he had so little that this was his only escape, especially in the 80s. It's not like media is so readily available to us now. If he wanted to see a movie, he genuinely had to go to the theater or watch it on VHS or something like that. But playing a video game was far more interactive. And I like the idea that like this is his one way of escaping a world that he didn't like very much. He didn't like his situation. And he was, this was his way to kind of unwind and get over it. But it was also a marker for him to achieve a personal best every time. He ends up acquiring the skill needed to be a starfighter. He earns being special. And that's kind of what I like about it. It's an acknowledgement that like he's special, but it's not because he's the chosen one. It's not just some you're born to be this, you're destined to be this.
Yeah,
He
he
wasn't
worked for it.
destined. He
The hard
worked at
work
it.
paid off. Yeah, granted, it was hard work playing a video game, but it's something that he put the time and effort into, and he became, even before he got into that cockpit, he became a starfighter.
Yes, he
Exactly.
was worthy to be a starfighter before he actually was deemed one, and I love that about it. I think that's one of the coolest things about it is that, and to me, that was what kind of made the whole idea a lot more special, because a lot of people, and unfortunately critics and some of the detractors, dismiss this film without really giving it much of a shot, because they can't get past the idea of like, oh really, he gets chosen to save the universe because he plays a video game. Like, what nerd
Well,
thought of that? And it's like, but if you listen to the premise and everything, it's actually very plausible. They
right.
find a way to test your skill that's reasonable for your planet. It made so much sense. So Centauri, I have very mixed feelings about. Like, let's get to Centauri. So Centauri is the guy who actually is in charge of the video game. He's the one that delivered it. He's the one, right? But they kind of make him out to be a con man. In fact, they even cast the same actor who was most well known for his portrayal of the Music Man in the famous musical, who was a legendary con artist.
Yeah.
And he does a brilliant job. He's great in the role for what they want him to do. I did think that tonally it felt a little weird, but for the most part, he does an amazing job with the part. What I loved about his whole thing was essentially that they kind of hide the idea that he's not even respected. He's like the anti-Obi-Wan. He's just a con man. He's a huckster. But the one thing,
he's a con man, but he feels like he's a salesman.
Right. And
the whole entire time he's trying to sell that being a starfighter is the greatest honor in the galaxy. Because you've
But
never
I think
heard
he
of
genuinely believes that.
Yeah, he does.
Like,
It's just he's a salesman. He's trying to get these guys into the cockpit because he knows that the starfighters are few and far between now.
And I like the idea that the reason he's washed up is because people have lost faith that the starfighter is ever going to come back.
Yeah.
Like, because he wasn't able to deliver. So, he has something to prove. Mm-hmm. And that's part of his desperation for getting Alex. But I think they gave him the best line of the whole movie, which is the one that gives me chills every time I hear it, is when Alex does turn it down and he takes him back to Earth, and they're arguing about whether or not he should be there, and Alex is just like, come on, what do you want from me? I'm just a kid from a trailer park. And suddenly Centauri turns very serious on him and points at him and says, if that's what you really think, then that's all you'll ever be.
Then that's all you'll ever be. And it's a very powerful line. It still holds true today.
It's amazing. It's an amazing line. And it sums up everything about what that movie is trying to say. And to me, that's what makes that movie special, is this whole idea of, be what you want to be, but earn it. It's not going to be handed to you by life. You have to fight, and you have to try, and you have to strive. And fail, because he does fail from time to time.
He quits.
And he quits. And I love the supporting cast. I think Griff, is it Griff? Yeah, it's Griff, right?
Greg. It sounds like Greg, but it's Greg.
Yeah, I think Greg is one of the best supporting characters in many films, because not only is he likable and he's charming and he's fun, but you really empathize with him, and you don't even spend that long with him on camera. I mean, he's not even in there that much, but you love that guy by the end of the movie, and you feel so much for him, especially when he opens up about what happened to his family. And I think his character does more to sell the conflict and the stakes of what's going on in space than anything else that happens in the movie, really, because it makes it personal.
It becomes real, and Alex sees the effects and everything, because the threat of the Kodans and everything getting through and then potentially threatening Earth doesn't mean anything to Alex, because it's not real. It's a potential threat. But when he sees somebody that's been nice to him,
what they've already done,
exactly, it becomes real at that point.
I just thought the characterization, the way they handled that, all that was great. I even love that the Starfighter ships are specially equipped. You know, the Starfighter ships themselves are incredibly difficult to pilot, and that's what makes a Starfighter special. Is, you know, only so many people in the galaxy can even handle a Starfighter because they're just
Right.
built to the point where they're so responsive. Um, and you know,
I like the fact that the guy that's essentially the starfighter, Alex, and all that's all he is the fighter. He doesn't have to worry about piloting the ship as well. He can
yeah,
take
Greg
on.
does that.
Yeah, Greg does. He's a navigator, life support guy. But I like the fact that he is just Alex is just in charge of the fighting, the blowing, blowing the other ships out of the sky. I like that duality to it because it actually can give you two different personalities that are needed for piloting a ship like that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
let me just give a shout out to, well, first of all, Greg was my favorite part of the whole movie. The humor with him was awesome, but yeah, that actor was also in one of my favorite films, RoboCop, as the old man.
As both RoboCops, 1 and 2, he
yeah,
plays
it's
he
true.
plays the same character.
Where he played an amazing
Yeah,
bad guy.
Yeah, he's so maniacal, and but to see him in makeup like that, showing like a compassionate role, is just amazing. It says
and
something
he
for him.
really is so charming. And to I know it's kind of a maybe sort of an underappreciated skill, but I've heard from a number of actors who have done, you know, Star Trek and different, yeah, sci-fi productions like that, where they've done heavy prosthetics. And a
Hmm.
lot of actors have talked about how hard it is to emote properly with that much prosthetic on your face.
He does
So,
it so
I mean,
well.
he does it so
It's
well.
it's the laugh. It's that little laugh that he does. It's so dry and everything,
Yeah,
but it makes a character with a stone face emote. Because it's
it makes him
over.
lovable.
It makes him lovable. But speaking of Star Trek, did you catch the one iconic piece of Star Trek scenery in the movie? There,
Um, well, a lot of it looks like stuff they've done, but is
the
there like a
one
specific
piece,
one you're
the
referring to?
one, one piece, and actually comes up mentioned in the great spoof Airplane 2, is the tube with the red beams going back and forth
Oh,
and
yeah.
everything.
Hmm.
It shows up there, and it's just one of those. Huh, it made me giggle. I saw. I was watching it again. I was like, yes, that's definitely definitely. It's a way to. I it's a subtle nod to just kind of tie everything in. It's like, yes, this is space. Apparently, they have tubes with red beams going back and forth. Everybody's got
Yeah,
it. They go down. They go down to Tubes R Us and everything like that, and just buy the tubes with the red beams.
they serve a very important function. Looking
Oh yeah.
cool.
But
So,
I'm in agree. I think we're all in agreement that this is a classic sci-fi movie that was well ahead of its time,
you're
in
right.
in
And
concept
it was
and
just too
production.
ambitious, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And
it's something that if they waited 10 years and brought this out in
mhm.
'94, could have done
Oh yeah,
gangbusters.
it would have looked incredible. And actually, the mid '90s would have been the perfect spot for it because if they'd waited any longer,
No,
unfortunately, the late '90s stuff was when everything started to go a little too in style, and they had a lot of filmmaking tropes that showed up around then that are very dated by today's standards, but were just extremely hip at the time. We're going to talk about that when we get to Titan AE.
yeah.
But
Actually, I think that's a
I
potentially good segue. Last thoughts on
that
Last
is, but
Starfighter?
I want to do one last thought on it. I think there was some. I do think there was some character issues. I think Maggie is criminally under. I think the actress was amazing, and there's
Yes.
not enough for her to do. But I think her part has a lot of potential, especially the fact that she can fix things.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I was disappointed that she wasn't used better. I do find the little brother annoying. I've just never really cared for him, even
He's
when
the
I was a
quintessential
kid.
80. He's the quintessential '80s sibling. It's got brothers and
I know
sisters.
he's
Has
meant to
that
be
kid.
annoying, but
The whole
I thought
movie
actually I
felt
thought
quintessential '80s to me.
yeah, it was
well,
very very '80s in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
very
But
80s.
and I
Did
do think the one design choice I actually really don't like is the look of the main alien race. That's like the weird bald head. but like
Oh,
strange,
the guy
strange
that the guy that.
forehead
Well,
and
actually, that's something
kind
that
of the
all
Captain Picard hair.
yeah, well,
Because they all
all the
have it.
Rylos, yeah, except
Rylance,
yeah,
that's it. The Rylance.
Yeah, the
Yeah, like
Rylands and everything.
I just don't care for the look. You
Yeah,
know, like to me, it just looks a little too silly because
yeah.
it just made everybody, including the women, just look like
I think it was meant to imply
like
that
late
maybe they're.
'60s men. You know,
Yeah, well, I
with the
think that
hair
it's meant to
problem.
imply because I mean, not only do they all have that haircut, but they also their foreheads are a little bit more bulbous, and I think that
Yeah,
that's a trope that's been done in a lot of sci-fi. Is that when you add a bigger cranium to a character, it's supposed to mean that their intelligence
there's
is they're smarter, that
right.
they have a more of an understanding of the universe. And that's why their technology is probably a little bit more further advanced than Earth's is.
Yeah, personally, from just a design standpoint, I just didn't care for it. But I still like the Starfighter uniforms and most of the other designs. I'm pretty down for.
Yeah,
I still think it's a great film, and I'll end on this one last point. Uh, I still think it's a strong enough movie that it's worth watching, it's worth checking out, and I cannot stress how good the soundtrack to this movie is. The
oh yeah.
theme for the last Starfighter is one of the best themes they've ever done for a movie. Period. It's absolutely fantastic, and it is criminal that it is super difficult to find the soundtrack for this thing.
I would agree. Ben, let's go with your final thoughts, and then I'm going to let you actually take the ball on Titan AE. So if you want to kind of wrap us up here on Last Starfighter.
I think with Derek's passion on that last one, that he wrapped it up pretty good for Starfighter. For me, it's
yeah,
I mean, it's a typical '80s. It's got the '80s tropes. It's a very '80s movie, and I mean, it was fun
Very
to
much.
watch. It's an '80s movie, and you can tell.
Yeah,
But that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
and I think
No,
there's
no,
absolutely
'80s
no
movies are
wrong.
great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that this is a classic example of '80s sci-fi, and I think that's what makes it such a watchable movie. And this is something that I can watch over and over again.
It's a movie about family.
Not really, but go ahead.
Just trying to quote the
but a movie
Star
that
Wars.
slightly is about family, or maybe
Sorta.
more of a dysfunctional family for whatever reason around that. Titan AE.
Well, I mean, it has family
Ben-
elements because he had, his father at the beginning, and then the
And
crew
then the
becomes his
potential
family,
crew,
and then Corso, which
to
ends
a
up
point.
kind of screwing him over at the.
The opening is obviously there's spoilers for both these movies. We should
Yeah,
mention
spoilers.
That,
Go
but
ahead.
Oh
whatever.
yeah, like an hour into the podcast. Let's
but-
worry about the.
Yeah.
Let's say spoilers.
No, we're gonna keep
Maybe
everything
we-
secret about Titan AE.
It's more for keeping track of it for future podcasts. We'll get better. But I was going to say that the opening of Titan AE, as predictable as it is still pretty powerful. When he loses his dad, that's legit. Like they did a very good job with that.
Give us a breakdown of the beginning of the movie. We can kind of progress through it. So
Well, okay.
And we can do the same thing we did with Last Starfighter. Start with what you didn't like, and then we'll work with what you did.
Yeah, because this is set way in the future, right? This is almost 2,000 years in the future.
1,000 years in our future.
In our future, okay.
Well,
right.
Okay.
Because at the end it said 3044 AD, but it was only 16 after
years.
like AE after Titan. So like.
Well, AE is after Earth.
So yeah. No, AD like 3044 AD, but then it was only 16 AE.
Oh, okay.
After Earth.
After Earth, yeah. The AE and Titan AE, for everyone that doesn't know, is after Earth, and that's one of the biggest plot points of the opening scene is the fact that Earth is gone. Earth is destroyed.
Okay, I'll start with the Dredge, an enemy made of pure energy. Now, at the end of the film, it's all of a sudden he's like, oh, I have an idea that nobody's ever thought of. This species made of pure energy. I can just take the computer and type some commands and tell this entire sophisticated system to use their energy and just use them as a power source, and that just kills them. Okay, then that creates a chain reaction with the Titan itself, which I know is the MacGuffin of the whole film. It's what the whole story is based on. It's that it can create life, and it creates a planet in the middle of an ice field. But that ice field, when it creates the planet, cools Earth. But it's like seems like a lot of evolution is just kind of crammed into about 30 seconds at the end. That all these people at the end suddenly start landing on, hey, a man-made planet, nothing can go wrong. This is, nobody's ever done this before, but we trust this is good.
Star Trek.
In planet.
There was a lot of Deus Ex Machina at the end, that's for sure. But
yeah, we're going to land on Planet Bob, and everything is going to be fine.
I'm not calling it Planet Bob.
I vote for Planet Bob.
No, I'm fine with the name, but that's the whole thing. Like, what I love that there was a song by the band Lit when he was like making that, or repairing that ship, where it's like I'm in over my head, and I'm like, okay, yeah, we get it, but he's like just completely repairing this spaceship from junk.
Right, and they're repairing the spaceship in the same time that when he discovers the now villains of the movie and everything, who used to be part of it, or were the crew and all that, are now ahead of him. But wait, we're going to do this repair montage and catch up with them, and then overtake them, and we'll beat them to where they already know where they're going.
It's Not only that, but like suddenly everybody in the junkyard station or wherever they were joins in to help him fix the ship. There's no explanation
thought about
given.
fixing the ship before.
It's like we're all going to help him fix that ship for reasons.
Yeah, realistically, if this was actually happening, they should have like done a flash forward like 73 months later, and then he's got a beard. And he's like, all right, we're finally ready.
Well, yeah, because it seems like a matter of hours. They've got this,
Guess what? I finally got the cup holders activated.
Yeah, after 15 or 16, 15, I'm going to say 15, 1 year off of Earth blowing up. This shuttle that was used to evacuate Earth. Yeah, the power cells around that, but it's been sitting there for 14, 15, 16 years, whatever it is around that. A couple hours repair job will get it to work and take us where we're wanting to go. No.
Yeah.
No,
especially because there's nothing even suggesting that those were supposed to be like fully operational deep space ships.
Well,
right,
and I wouldn't trust
large escape pods.
I wouldn't trust the maneuvering in that ice field.
Well, no, but that goes to the character that Kima. That goes to her ability to fly.
I don't care what kind of shit you put together. If it's made of turds, it's not going to fly. I don't care what kind of pilot you have.
Fair enough.
But no, I did enjoy this film, as you can tell.
You're off to a great start.
Yeah, it's an enjoyable watch. I mean, I think I saw it shortly after it came out. This movie was not. I think we all agree the reason why this movie is underappreciated is that was not promoted really well. It was It was almost a failure at the box office. But I don't think that it was the creator's fault for making a bad movie. I think that it stemmed from bad marketing and bad promotion.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a little bit of insight on this because this was one of only 2 films fully produced by Fox Animation Studio. This one and Anastasia.
And they decided after Titan AE to actually shut down their animation production studio.
But even though they did help on Prince of Egypt and they did some other work, the truth is just that Fox never really got behind this. It was very experimental. They didn't really know what they were doing. I mean, I don't know how else to put that. Like, it's nothing personal to anybody there. It really seems like they didn't really know what they had. They were willing to take chances and make more mature animated titles, and I love them for that. It doesn't really seem like they really understood what they were doing as far as how to market this thing, how to properly convey what the audience needs to know in order to get, butts and shares.
Right, exactly. And I feel like it still had some good tropes that it made fun of, like even with Preed saying an intelligent guard. I didn't see that coming, and like they had a lot of good. They had something. It's just they didn't. Yeah, it wasn't marketed well because I had a friend tell me about it when this came out, and I was like, "What the hell is this movie?" And it was like in theaters, and I had not seen a single advertisement. I had to have a friend tell me about it.
Right. I think the biggest problem that this might stem from, and this actually kind of goes along with The Last Starfighter, is that it's a great movie set it was released at the wrong time, because even in the year 2000, animated movies were marketed generally, I'd say 90% or not more, to kids. And I'm talking kids under the age of 10. Here you got an almost adult theme movie. This is definitely a teen themed movie that's made for 13, 14, 15, 12, 13, 14, 15, if not older adult, older in your 20s or like
it's
that.
more or less an attempt at an anime.
And even in 2000, anime, while popular, hadn't had its big explosion yet,
Well, and it's weird, but I would still say it still hasn't, which is crazy because anime is super popular in the West now. We have tons of platforms like Crunchyroll and everything else, but overwhelmingly, it still doesn't feel very mainstream, even though it seems very prevalent on the internet. Like your average person doesn't seem to really be that interested in anime outside of like something from Studio Ghibli, for instance.
But I think even more at that point, you came out with a great animated movie with some adult themes to it, and it's hard to market that towards kids, and then it's even harder to market an animated movie at the time.
Well, it's crazy
adults.
too with the cast that it had, because you're talking Matt Damon, Bill Pullman, John Leguizamo, Nathan Lane, Janeane Garofalo, Drew Barrymore, Ron Perlman, Tone Loc.
Fantastic cast.
Yeah, I mean, a great cast. And
I would, but I would actually venture to make a bit of a comparison here. I think part of the problem is it's a hard pitch. Like I don't know how to put that better, but I think it suffered from the exact same problem that Treasure Planet did. Now, Treasure Planet's a very similar movie that Disney made. I think it was 2003 is when that one came out. Very ambitious, also sci-fi, meant for an older crowd. And it's interesting to me that Treasure Planet, which is, by the way, also a very underappreciated film, it's fantastic, has its drawbacks, but for the most part, it's pretty solid. But it was horribly marketed, and it really feels like Disney didn't even want to market it. And then they really couldn't get the message across as to what this was, which seems like it should have been so easy. It's a pirate space movie. It's Treasure Planet. I mean, it's Treasure Island in space. This shouldn't be hard. But it's amazing how many people didn't really understand what they were trying to do with the movie. And I think that that's kind of the problem with Titan AE is it was too difficult to summarize very quickly what this movie was in the span of, however long, like the few seconds they get to really pitch it, like a 30-second TV ad or something like that.
Right. It's hard to condense a story down into that, and that. I mean, what we know of advertisements today is like, okay, like you said, there's a form, like you've said before, there's a formula for getting a trailer out there. It's like, we're going to show an action sequence, we're going to give you just a hint at what a plot point might be, and here's the stars, here's the other stars, and go from here. In an animated film, it's hard to do that because you can't really show the stars for who they are. You have an animated character, not, you can't put like Matt Damon's face next to the animated character, or like Matt Damon's voice. Oh, hey, he's in that movie. Okay,
you'd almost have to say starring Matt Damon, like, and flash his name on the screen, then show his character say something, and then you'd have to condense the story, like of Earth is destroyed, the humans created.
Not to mention the fact that their animation is very limited at the time, because it's not like you have all this footage that just needs to be polished and finessed that you can put in the trailer. There's entire scenes they can't put in the trailer because they're not animated yet.
Yeah,
like they're at the mercy of whatever they've already animated to put in the trailer. And they did use CGI in this. This was one of the
they did
probably the heaviest. This is probably the heaviest hybrids
for the space for the dredge
for the time.
They also
and
did
then some of the ships were CGI too.
Right. And
that's what I was saying. The space scenes and the dredge.
One of the most interesting facts that I found about this movie that I'm sure you guys both know about, but we know that this was released in 2000. Do you guys know what happened when they went to do the preview premiere for this?
Not ringing a bell.
No.
Okay. So, all right. So they did a preview premiere for it, like I guess like a first showing down in Atlanta. They had a digital projector set up in the studio, set up in the theater where they were showing this. The production company, or Fox. This was Fox, right? Yeah. They sent a digital copy of the film over the internet to the theater, and basically, essentially streamed the movie over the internet in a theater
In
for this.
2000?
In 2000, it was this movie at the premiere never touched film. It was all sent.
Really?
Yep. First movie to ever
That's
be done with that. Yeah, and
That's
especially for
interesting.
2000.
Talk
Yeah.
about ahead of its time.
Oh yeah, again, we're talking like two movies here that are both underappreciated and I think ahead of its time.
Well, this was another great example of one where it really does. You can almost feel the frustration, on the screen with it not being able to do quite what they want it to do. I mean, it's just kind of, it's like a vibe you just get from the movie.
Yeah. You don't see it nearly as much because it is animated. Everything can flow and it's easier to correct, but it's you still there's something missing. That last little shake of secret sauce never made it to the plate of this.
Well, and even now, it's still fairly hard to see because this still isn't released on Blu-ray. I mean, I've been at Best Buy recently, and I did see this on DVD for $5. But yeah, this is not released on Blu-ray at all. No.
Well,
there's no
actually,
release.
none of the films from that particular era are on Blu-ray. Anastasia is not on Blu-ray. This is not on Blu-ray. The Prince of Egypt is not on Blu-ray. So many of those films that were kind of in the experimental, we're trying to do a new animation studio era.
Never made it there.
Because I don't even know if Fievel Goes West and American Tail is on Blu-ray yet either.
Huh. That's wild. I wonder if that'll change now with the Disney and Fox merger. I wonder if that'll change.
It might.
But
I kind of doubt it.
But this also goes to what Disney's doing next year with their streaming service.
But what's weird too is that you can still buy this on DVD. Like you can still buy this brand new on DVD at Best Buy. Like there's not a Blu-ray release, but they will have this on DVD at Best Buy brand new right now.
Right. And there's got to be some weird licensing issue because I know that
could be.
DreamWorks has the rights to Prince of Egypt, and I think American Tail as well, but I could be wrong because American Tail was also produced by Steven Spielberg, but I don't know if it was under the DreamWorks banner at the time.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, so there's maybe like a connection to Amblin. I'm not really sure. Basically the point is that a lot of these kind of got put into the ether, and ironically, a lot of these same films have ties to the director of this film, Don Bluth, who's very underappreciated. Really, like he himself is a very underappreciated artist. Because he's been behind some of the great animation movies, American Tail, Secret of Nim.
Secret of Nim, yes. A great movie that I remember watching over and over while growing up.
He actually even did the Dragon's Lair game, the infamous Dragon's Lair arcade game, was also Don Bluth.
Oh, that's one of the things. They were actually, at the time, because he did a lot of the animation storyboards for the game, they were in talks with him to do an animated film with 2 parts. Mm-hmm. And when Fox shut down their animation studios, it never came up.
Right.
It basically died along with the studio.
Yeah, he's behind a lot of the better non-Disney animated movies. He has a lot of flops too. Don't get me wrong, but it seems that his flops have more to do with studio problems than with him. But he's definitely a fan of the darker animated movies. Like his tend to be more serious. I don't know if he directed All Dogs Go to Heaven, but I know he was involved in that one as well.
Okay.
So when you think of these like darker kids movies, 9 times out of 10, Don Bluth had something to do with it, and he's a co-director on Titan AE, and I think that the guy doesn't get enough credit because he really is very talented, and he was actually a former Disney animator, and he left Disney because he got very frustrated with how they were constantly, I forget how he put it, but essentially basically constantly dumbing down everything and making it safer and constantly shaving off the edges of the scary stuff and like
making it marketable, making it sellable to kids to get their parents to take them.
Here's an interview he did there where he very passionately talks about the fact that kids movies need to be dark. Like you need to talk about how like there's danger in the world. Kids need to be prepared for this stuff.
Yeah, who better to teach them than the characters are watching on screen? I'm not saying that there can't be a happy ending, and you don't have to end the movie on a dark note.
Right.
But there has to be the hard lessons taught in there. It has to be dark in that aspect of it.
Well, and stakes.
Speaking of,
and he also directed The Land Before Time. Just wanted to throw that out there.
There you go.
Gotcha. I'm just checking.
We were
online.
talking about darker moments.
You can get American Tail on Blu-ray, but I don't think Five Goes West. But American Tail is on Blu-ray.
Good.
It's $15 on Amazon right now. I just was curious.
But getting back to Titan AE, I think it does a very good job of actually being marketable. I mean, out of all of Don Bluth's films, I think this one's actually the most marketable, pretty much of any of them. In the fact that it's a very straightforward sci-fi adventure.
Yep.
And it's kind of a shame that it just didn't really get the marketing it needed to, and the push it needed to, especially because I would also like to talk about how forward it was in some of its practices, because in some ways it was a lot more, progressive as far as I remember it being kind of a bigger deal. I know this sounds stupid, but I remember it being kind of a bigger deal that I cannot pronounce the lead love interest name. Is it Akira?
Yeah,
or Akima.
Akima.
That's it. It's
like
been
Akira,
too long.
but it's Akima.
Yeah, I was just blanked. It's been too long since I've seen this movie, but I remember it being a really big deal that like she had purple hair and that she looked like kind of like part Asian and that sort of thing, because it just really wasn't done in animation that much to have a character that even would have like a punk hairstyle, for instance. It seems so silly, like it's so ludicrous to make a big fuss about it. But I remember like a lot of people commenting about it at the time, and the alien designs were rather unique and interesting. That they're not just forehead aliens that you're used to seeing on Star Trek and some of the others. Like a lot of them had very interesting creature designs to them.
Right. I mean,
the cook was a cricket from Earth.
Yeah, the cook was a cricket. Yeah. The gunner or the weapons specialist and everything, it seemed like she was a hybrid of like
Janine Garofalo.
Yeah, she was a kangaroo.
Who was great, by the way.
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. Kangaroo and a dog, because very, very long muscular legs, but the torso was so short in the face of it was so distorted, but it worked.
Yeah.
And even the canine villain having one ear essentially missing or at least half chopped off and everything, little things like that.
Like the metal plate, yeah.
I believe
and what's great about it is
I believe that was Preed. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, Preed. Yeah,
Preed, who is done by Nathan Lane, who is also the voice of Timon in Lion King.
Oh man, there's
and I would actually like to point out how fluid all of them moved. I think that to me was very impressive. Was the fact that not just that you have very unique aliens, but that they all move very naturally.
Yes, they didn't. It wasn't a boxy type of move. It didn't look out of place. It looked right for their character design.
Mm-hmm. And that's very impressive because even I hate to say this about the movie because I love Treasure Planet, but even Treasure Planet has a problem with some of their characters feeling very like their movements don't quite match what their body type should do. I mean, for the most part, they do a very good job as well, but I think this one actually did a better job. And I still think that, especially because of the gap in time and the similar styles, that I would think that Treasure Planet's elements of it were inspired, at least partially, by Titan AE.
I could see that. One of the things I do love about the movie, I mean, you guys brought this up, it's a very dark movie. I mean, obviously speaking with like the more mature themes and everything else, you don't see done a lot. I mean, this could be because it's set in a post-apocalyptic space universe. We're back to a dark and gritty space again. Everything seems very well used. And on contrast, the Dirge, is that right?
Dredge.
The Dredge, thank you, Dredge. They're very bright. Yes, they're pure energy, but using the shades of blue and everything, making them very vibrant and everything. It's kind of an offset of the usual, the hero wears white and the villains wear black. it's that the heroes are in this dark and kind of smudgy, dark and gritty universe, and that's kind of how their ships are, and that's where their outposts are for these refugee camps where they find the spaceship that they fixed. That's all dark and gritty, and the aliens are very vibrant and very bright. And it gives you that clear distinction, but
it plays very well to the idea that humans are refugees and that they're looked down upon by the rest of the universe because, like, historically, it's very unfortunate, but historically, refugees are usually not looked upon kindly by other nations that they end up settling in.
Right.
I mean, there's many examples I could point to, but
right.
yeah, it's a common thing to happen. And I thought it was kind of interesting that they did that with all of humanity versus the alien races.
Right. And Ben, you were talking about this before we started, and I think it needs to be brought up. What was exactly the beef between the Dredge and the humans? I mean, it's like we start out with the movie, and it's set in the future. The Dredge come, and they blow up the Earth, essentially trying to wipe out all humanity. But we never really get a reason why, do we? Or at least it's not clearly explained. But you said that there was a reason, right?
There is a reason given at the beginning.
It must have been really quick.
Okay. The opening monologue basically describes that every several millennia, humanity takes a step forward, and at the beginning of the 21st century, humanity took another one, and that was when they created the Titan Project. And it was, as the movie said, it was an example of humanity's unlimited ability. And he said perhaps that's what the Dredge feared most about us, because it brought them down upon us without warning. The Dredge were afraid that the humans were going to become more powerful than them, so they decided to strike first.
Okay. I guess I get it. Yeah. Okay. It makes sense now that when you explain it that way, so the Dregs are out there in the universe, kind of doing their own thing, and they're progressing their society to their point around that, and they kind of keep an eye on the humans. The humans seem to be progressing, and they're like, okay, they've gone to space, no big deal. They're not really doing anything with it, but then they get whiff of the Titan Project, which would essentially could create life anywhere.
They were willing to destroy Earth to try to destroy the Titan. The Titan made it off Earth.
Right. And, and this is, I guess, Derek, this goes to your wheelhouse with the Genesis Project in the Star Trek original Star Trek movies. It's like, if you can create life anywhere on a dead planet, because that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to create life from a dead planet. What is to say that somebody can't use it as a weapon and they're going to drop it on a planet where there's already life and essentially wipe out the life that was already there in favor of this new life that's got to grow? So now, what seems like a good idea now becomes a weapon of destruction.
It could very easily be considered a preemptive strike. Personally, I think it could have been explained better in the story. Because that's one of my beefs with this movie, is that I never really get the sense that the Dredge have a real strong reason to wipe out humanity. I mean, it's all very loose, and it's
what they explain at the beginning is that it's never really explained or known, but that's why humanity assumes that's why the Dredge attacked them, because you're getting this from a story point of a surviving human. Maybe they think that's why they came down upon it. Yeah, and story-wise, it's not explained, but you're getting it from his perspective, and it's insinuating that. So it's not even 100% explained that way, but that is what they're insinuating. So I can only assume that's what the storytellers want you to think. I mean, it may not be the best way to come about it, in the story, but you know what I'm saying.
I think I'm usually okay with that, and I actually even like keeping some things mysterious. But I do think that in this case, they should have thrown us a little bit of a bone. Maybe it just needed something, maybe just a little extra or something. But,
well, a lot of this is one of my issues with Titan AE, is that a lot of it does feel rushed, with the formation of the planet at the end. That's like evolution happening in 30 rushed. Seconds. Everything kind of feels pushed through. It's Dredge hate us because they need it to for the plot to happen for this. So you have to sit here and enjoy it so you can love these people and then accept the fact that they create a planet at the end.
No, I'm even okay with the fact that planet forms quickly, because just like the Genesis effect, you can have the planet form fast, and I don't think it hurts the
Sure,
hurts the
but
narrative.
in context with
I
a lot
think
of this movie,
to me the biggest problem is that the colony ships show up like 2 seconds
away.
later.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's like,
wait,
hey, we made this
whoa,
planet. We've enjoyed
were
it
you
for an
guys just like
hour.
all on standby? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on?
The thing I do like is
I agree. It does feel rushed.
the thing I do like is that inside the Titan sphere itself, when they first get on there, he comes down the corridor and flips the first lights on and everything, and there's just these racks with these vials in it. And what you've come to find out when he starts reading off some of them is that they've got living things, or at least most of the living things from Earth. They've got the DNA strands to essentially replicate life. Now, put as much science as you want to in that or not. I mean, it's a great concept that shows the idea that this is where they were going with it. This is the idea behind it. I mean, we all know that like genetic mutations will take over eventually.
it's like a fresh start.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
but
basically
it's
a space
good.
Noah's
That's
Ark.
exactly. It's a great plot point, and I like that about it. When I remember watched it, it was like, oh,
yeah, I like that. I like that the fact that it's a good payoff to the mystery of what the Titan ship was and why it would matter so much to humanity, and why the Dredge would care so much about destroying it.
Why it's so valuable to find. Why everyone should.
Well,
be
it's beyond terraforming.
Right.
No blame.
Yeah, so much. Yeah. That's another conversation.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a good movie. It's worth a watch for anybody that hasn't seen it, and I think that that hasn't seen it, if you've got any kind of sci-fi background or appreciate sci-fi, you'll like it.
And I'm willing to bet that there's probably an original draft of this script. It's about 3 hours long. That's probably extremely good. Mostly because I still think there's a lot of really good dialogue and character
this is
moments.
The water world of animation.
Yeah, like I think that this is again just another case of it's too ambitious, and it's just not able to live up to it, and it's a shame, because I also feel like the strange animation that they did in some cases doesn't really work, because it was frustrating to me. I remember from my last watch session of it was there were so many times where I felt like the voice delivery was actually pretty good, but the animation felt weird with it. Like it didn't quite jive. It's not that it was like a bad it wasn't like a bad animation of a gesture, and it wasn't a bad delivery. They just don't match.
They don't match, yeah. And that might be due to the point is, that a lot of times they don't record while watching the animation, so
I'm sure a lot of it too came down to budget with this film.
Right.
And there's a very good chance that they animated it to a temp track, and it probably fit the temp track really well. But then when they had the actors, come in and perform the final voiceover, suddenly they deliver it with a different inflection. Right. It doesn't really fit it anymore.
Yeah, which comes down to, again, budget, I think.
Budget, yeah. Well, also probably a certain amount of experience. They were a pretty new studio.
Yeah, sure.
But I think overall,
because I believe they had the same problem in Anastasia as well. Anastasia felt like that at times.
I never saw Anastasia, but I'd be willing to bet that you probably are right, because I mean, if your studio and especially with the money that Fox had and everything, and you're willing to sink a lot into an animation studio, I don't think that you really could give up on 2 films unless you've got somebody telling you that something's not right. And I think that maybe 2 films with similar problems and everything, it's like, okay, something's not right, we're going to pull the plug now. But I mean, overall, I think we all like this movie. It's definitely a hidden gem, again, like Starfighter, ahead of its time. And for anybody that hasn't seen it, grab a copy.
I will say that
find it.
It suffers from the similar thing with Last Starfighter, like we talked about. It's a very early 2000s movie, and it feels it much like Last Starfighter is a very 80s movie. Like there's a lot of things that date it, like the rock music, for instance, which to me it really takes me out of the movie. I feel like it's really out of place.
Well, some of it is not every track I agree with, but there's some songs that I do like, but not every track
No,
I don't think
yeah.
fits. But
there's
so I'm
some
not
that
saying
work.
it's a perfect soundtrack, like to actually go
Right.
with the movie in itself. But I feel
But
like it was
there was
trying to
a
be the '90s version of it because like in '80s movies
right,
they have great scores, and like the '90s movies they feel like they
right.
instead of scores they try to put
They got
the
great
music to
soundtracks.
it. Yeah, they try to put
Right.
these
Yeah,
good soundtracks to it.
So, and then
It had a
market it
decent
as
one,
a
but it's
popular
not.
song.
Yeah, it's not perfect. So I'm not gonna say that. Oh yeah,
right.
this is
And
every
it
song
has
is.
some of that MTV filmmaking stuff
Yeah,
going
well, it
on
had
where,
to. I mean, some of the bands in there were like Power Man 5000 and Lit, and so it was like some of
yeah.
those bands from the late '90s, early 2000s.
But I guess all I'm getting at is it was very much trying to be very trendy for the time, and that's unfortunately it does date it a little bit, but I still think it's a very solid film overall. I'd still recommend it. I still think it
I
has a
would
lot to offer.
I, I would recommend it to somebody that would say like, hey, somebody that's not necessarily a sci-fi person. They'd be like, or especially if they're like, hey, I just watched Star Trek, or I want to get into, maybe watching Star Wars or something like that. It's one of those hidden gems that you kind of throw a bone to somebody and be like, hey, you know what? Check this out. Good story, good plot, and all that. Just if you want to have a fun movie to watch and be visually aware of a movie, especially an animated one, watch this. It's not animated. It's not animated in the animated style. It's animated to the point where you watch it and actually be
Right.
pleased with watching it. So, I think on that note, I think we should probably wrap everything up. I think we've covered two wonderful movies that are hidden gems that are worth recommending to people that I think we're probably going to. I mean, I know that I'm probably going to watch Last Starfighter again in a couple of weeks just because it's in the forefront of my brain. But until next time, I'm Chris.
And I'm Ben.
I'm Derek.
And we'll catch you guys next time on Space Problems.